One of the hottest topics in artificial intelligence is agentic AI. And agents have the ability to use LLMs to make plans and then act on those plans with little to no human intervention at all. Now, I personally don't know how I feel about agents, but what I do know is that our future AI tools are going to be full of them. Here's how we use them to do research. So before I demo for you how we use agentic AI to help us with research, I think it's kind of important to take a step back and consider what Google is for a second, because Google is a very large tech company that has many teams developing many products. So you'll notice that, there's Google Search, right? There's Gmail, there's YouTube, there is a team that develops NotebookLM, there's a team that develops Gemini. Hopefully by now you've started to notice that a lot of the features that we've been seeing are kind of getting borrowed and used in different contexts. So let me just give you a quick example. If you want a really good RAG system, you obviously want to use NotebookLM. But if you're making a custom chatbot, you can actually make like a mini RAG system with up to 10 documents if you make a custom chatbot known as a gem. And so the reason I bring that up is because we're going to look at this mode of Gemini called deep research. And the way that we're going to use it today is going to look very similar to what we did with NotebookLM. Keep in mind, that's totally fine. A lot of the features that we're going to be looking at, you're going to see pop up in a lot of Google's products. And actually, a lot of the features we are looking at, you see in other tech companies' products as well. But the main difference that happens under the hood between NotebookLM and deep research is that deep research is agentic. And so what do I mean by that? So if we think about NotebookLM for a second, every aspect in terms of the instructions and what to do with the user's prompt, all of that has been decided by the team that runs NotebookLM to say, well, when the user wants this, run it through the system and give me that. If the user wants this, then go use the LLM to find out what this is. These are all systems that are predefined and predetermined and pre-instructed by a Google engineer or a set of Google engineers. When we start thinking about agentic AI, there's a switch that happens here. We're still interacting with the chatbot. We're still using the capabilities of large language models, but no engineer has told this system the instructions of what to do with our prompt. That's the unique thing about agents in this context, right? The agents take our prompt, run it through an LLM to kind of figure out what does the user want, and develops its own plan, and then acts on that plan. And so, again, this is a very subtle difference. This is something that happens very much under the hood. You are definitely going to see much more agents in the apps that you use and the websites that you use in the near future. Okay, so how are we going to do this today? Let's start by opening up Gemini. So here is our basic Gemini screen. And what you'll see is there's a button down here that we've kind of ignored up until now, the deep research button. All you got to do is click that button and it is now highlighted and we've activated the deep research mode. And so here's what I want you to do this week with deep research. I want you to actually find out how large language models and generative AI are being used in your biological field of choice. So again, my field, if it's not obvious by now, is biomechanics, comparative biomechanics. I want to run a quick deep research query to figure out how have large language models improved biomechanical research. So let's just make a quick prompt. I would like to know how LLMs and generative AI are currently being used to help researchers in the field of comparative biomechanics. And you can start with this prompt, right? Just take this and input your field there. Maybe cell biology, maybe developmental biology, maybe ecology. Whatever field you want to, you can plop in here. Is there anything else I want to add? How is this technology currently helping researchers? How will this technology help researchers in the future? Pretty simple. We'll hit the submit button, and what you'll notice is this is going to take a lot longer. Right? Usually Gemini is pretty quick with what it gives back to you. This can take a while. And what you'll see is it doesn't actually answer our question right away. Because we've activated the deep research mode, it actually comes back with a plan, a research plan of all things. And so what you can see here is the first step is to research websites. And we're going to expand this to see like what Gemini thinks is a good plan. So step one, we're going to look at current LLMs and generative AI in the broader context of scientific research, then narrow it down to biomechanics. It's going to try to identify concrete examples and methodologies. It's going to look at specific software, frameworks, or platforms. Gemini is then going to analyze recent publications and case studies to try to find some examples of LLMs and generative AI being used in the field. There's going to be some expert predictions and some discussions and some roadmaps that it's going to try to find. And then finally, it gave itself this bullet point. It's going to speculate on how these technologies could facilitate entirely new approaches to comparative biomechanics research design. Last thing, it's going to identify current limitations, challenges, and ethical considerations. So I think that's a pretty good plan. There is one major downside to this, which is that currently it can only search through websites. And so if there's papers or primary literature that doesn't exist on the internet and it's not stored in a publicly available way, we're not going to be able to pick up on any of that. But I think if you are jumping into a new field, this is a pretty good start. Now, if you want to modify this at all, you totally can. You could click edit plan, and what you're going to do is have a conversation back and forth with the chatbot. Maybe we'll do that really quick. Let's edit the plan. And so here's the plan, and it's asking what changes do I want to make. And like, I just think this is a solid plan. So this is a solid plan. I would like to heavily focus more on current studies and labs that are using LLMs in their research. So again, just to kind of give it a little bit more of an emphasis, you don't have to do this, but I'm going to. And so Gemini is going to think. It's going to generate a updated plan. And so we can see over here more. So it did modify this a little bit. It went in here and it said, look for concrete examples in comparative biomechanics focusing on specific research group, labs, or institutions. So small little change. It might make a difference. It might not. And what you'll see is that it'll do this work. It'll find the websites, it'll analyze the results, and then it'll create a report that we should be able to see in just a few minutes. So let's hit start research. And this is maybe one of my favorite things about the deep research mode. You actually get reports back from Gemini on what it found when it found it. So here we go. We can start to see the sort of like commentary or this narrative of what Gemini is actually doing. It's going to start with an approach that broadly explores LLMs. Gemini has identified key information that it's looking for. It wants to find concrete examples of how LLMs and generative AI are currently assisting researchers in comparative biomechanics. And then it has a set of next steps that it wants to do, right? It's going to conduct a series of targeted searches, beginning with general queries about LLMs and generative AI in scientific research, and then refining back down to biomechanics, data analysis, simulation, etc., etc. So you can see a couple of the websites that Gemini has identified as having some really important information, and then you get to see what Gemini has found. Gemini started exploring the general landscape of LLMs. It has identified this emerging applications in biomechanics. It has found some generative models and specific labs, for example, the UCSF Quantitative Biomarkers and AI in Musculoskeletal Imaging Lab. That's pretty cool. And now it's actually making the next steps. It doesn't stop there. It kind of figures out, well, what are the next steps that the agent needs to do? This deep research Gemini mode, what should it do next? So here's the next step. Delve deeper into specific academic papers and lab websites that have been identified, browsing sources to extract more granular details on methodologies, etc. And again, it didn't come up with this instruction until it actually went out and found these websites and summarized the websites to the best of its ability. And so this is what an agent is going to do. And it doesn't really take that much intervention from me, the human, right? The AI took my prompt, my initial prompt, and said, here's my plan to figuring this out. I'm going to start very generic and learn as much as I can. And then once I learned the generic stuff, now I'm going to make a plan to go deeper, to find the more nuanced material. Now that I have a better idea of a generic understanding of this field, I'm going to take some time and actually look at some specifics. And this is a very iterative process. Gemini is going to continue to do this until it thinks it has enough information to actually write you a report. And so while I was explaining this, here's what Gemini found. It looked at a couple of websites, and we can see that some of these are from ResearchGate. Some of these look like they're from PubMed. So there are some primary literature papers in here. It also looks like there are some lab websites that can be very, very informative. But we see there are some current applications. There's a paragraph specifically about musculoskeletal insights, and made a new plan. What's the next step? Now Gemini will reattempt to access key archive papers on LLMs for human motion understanding, as the previous attempt was unsuccessful. So this is actually really interesting. This chatbot understands when it can't find what it's looking for. And so if that's the case, what would a human do? A human would probably try a different set of search queries until maybe you're able to find that one piece of information that unlocks that knowledge that you're looking for. So Gemini is just straight up telling me, I'm going to try it again. I'm happy with that. Let's keep going. Okay. What else? It's moved on now to challenges and limitations. I think that was one of the last bullet points that we had in terms of the instructions. And then here are your next steps. Gemini now has a comprehensive body of information covering current applications. And the next step will be to synthesize all the information into a structured and detailed report. So it has now switched from research mode to summary report mode. And this could take some time. It's actually writing a pretty detailed report based off of all the information that it's found. And again, I haven't really touched the system or poked the system since my initial query, right? Since I hit run after I edited the prompt a little bit, it's just gone and done its own thing. So this is what agents do. This is why every large tech company is trying to push their large language models to become better with more parameters, for sure, but also to develop these agents to, for better or for worse, minimize human interaction with the chatbot. After, 5-10 minutes, you'll actually get like a legit report from your query. And so here's my report. You can see it's given a title, The Transformative Impact of LLMs and Generative AI in Comparative Biomechanics Research, Current Applications, Key Players, and Future Trajectories. I'm just going to scroll through this just to show you what it did. But there's chapters in here. It's very well organized. This kind of looks like a mini thesis or just like a mini report. Now, I will tell you, there are some situations in which I might consider using Agentic AI to do research for me, and then there are many situations in which I would not. Keep in mind, this is still a chatbot. This is still using large language models, and large language models still have the ability to miss things, to lie to you, to hallucinate, to do all of the negative things that we still acknowledge large language models and generative AI can do today. But before we jump into when I would do this, let's just go through this report to see what it did and maybe how I would start to use information from this. So I am an expert in comparative biomechanics. I'm trying to be an expert in AI. And so this is a new field for me because I'm trying to branch the two together. I don't know off the top of my head the best way to use generative AI and large language models for doing biomechanics research. And in that case, having a report like this is actually really helpful. We can actually jump into a new field or into a slightly new expertise that we don't have and get caught up very quickly. So that is exactly when I would use something like this. If I wanted to understand more about what generative AI is in research, we could look here. I'm mostly interested in current applications of LLMs. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just scanning through the chapters. And so here, chapter 2 seems very interesting to me. So we can see that there is a multimodal AI. It's using autoregressive LLMs, which are just, specific kinds or different flavors of large language models, but large language model at heart. It is explored for its capacity to enhance human motion and understanding and generation. Okay. So to me, this is very interesting. I don't know if Gemini is lying to me or not. And so I'm interested now to kind of figure out, are there actually large language models that help with this? The easiest way to do this is to just immediately check the source. And how do you check the source? This little down arrow, this little caret right here, you click learn more, and kind of like what we saw in Notebook LM, it shows you where it's pulling that information from. So it looks like there are a bunch of archive, and if you don't know what archive is, these are sort of like pre-published papers, could potentially be published someday. We have 2 papers from ResearchGate, which is like a social network for researchers. These look like legit papers. I'm just going to check one out. I'm just going to click it and see what it gives us. This was a published paper in May 2025, so pretty recent. It is a preprint. Multimodal Gen AI with autoregressive LLMs for human motion understanding and generation. Okay, so this is a legit paper. And what I would do if I was doing this for real is try to get a copy of this PDF as soon as I can. This is kind of how I would use deep research. I would use it to find new ideas, use the large language model to try to be creative, to try to figure out like, well, what is potentially out there. And then I want to go verify this, and I want to go read this paper now and do everything that we did over the last 3 weeks. Find the paper, read it, make an outline, maybe put that into Notebook LM and then do a literature review that way. Try to find sources that are related to it. But one thing that I just want you to be very aware of is I would not stop at the paragraph. I would not stop at deep research giving me this. But now this is on my radar and something that I can process away from the AI, trying to put myself back in charge of this research project. Okay? Let's see what else we have over here. Let's go to the next sort of subheading, facilitating cross-species locomotion analysis and comparative anatomy. Okay, that sounds like a super cool heading to me. I just want to make sure that there are things in here that actually make sense. So let's see. There's a notable application. It has extracted species-independent patterns from locomotion data collected across diverse organisms, including worms, beetles, mice, and humans. Okay, this is like totally up my alley. So I'm like hoping that this is real. Don't know if it is, but we'll expand this to try to figure out, is this real? So it's only listing one source, and it looks to be an article. It's not even a primary research article. But let's just open it to see. Maybe I was a little bit too hopeful. This was in 2021. We see that there are some machine learning algorithms, so that has something to do with AI. There's some deep learning over here, and it can determine the species according to the characteristics of its tracks left behind in the snow. Really cool. Okay, so that's super interesting to me. Now, again, I wouldn't just go off of this, right? This is, again, an article. It's not even primary literature. What I would want to do is find the primary literature that they're citing, which is right here. Nature Communications, Cross-Species Behavior Analysis with Attention-Based Domain Adversarial Deep Neural Networks. So what have I just gained from this? I gained a new reference, and if I wanted to, a little bit of context in terms of how that might fit my interest. So not only am I finding a new piece of primary literature, I'm getting a little bit of how this fits my specific context that I'm researching at this moment. So again, as you saw, it took a little bit of digging, right? Gemini wasn't able to find that paper, but it was able to find an article that cited that paper. And that is definitely a paper that I'm going to add to my list of papers to read in the future. So you can do this for this whole report. You can go through section by section, subheading by subheading, making sure that what you find is actually a real and reputable source. And if you can't find a primary journal article, even if it's a preprint, it probably doesn't exist, and Gemini probably made it up. But you do need to put in this extra amount of work because this system is just not good enough to fully 100% trust just yet. In other words, as much as agentic research is cool, and as much as it was neat to get this entire report written for me and summarized without my intervention at all, like this 100% still needs my intervention. It still needs my eyes and my brain and my processing capabilities to, one, make sure that these papers are real, and two, to make sure that these papers are actually saying what Gemini thinks it's saying. Now, is this a good starting off point? 100%. If I was jumping into a new field that I had not researched before, or that I was just like trying to get into for the first time, maybe I have like a collaborator who does like this very specific engineering thing that I know nothing about, maybe I might do a really quick deep research report to start me off in my journey of learning more about that field and becoming an expert in that field. But so far, this stuff cannot replace me, and it can't replace my work. I want to show you one more thing before we do best practices, which is just how do you get this information out. The easiest way you can do this is you can export this out to a Google Doc. And the reason why this is really important is because, remember, if you export something out to Google Docs, you could re-import that Google Doc back into Notebook LM. And so I like to do a lot of my thinking and a lot of my working with Notebook LM, or maybe like a customized chatbot, but getting some of this deep research work out for me to evaluate later, it's kind of nice that we can get it as a Word document. So hopefully I made a good case for when you would use Agentic AI, how that can help you if you're especially trying to dive into a new field that you're not super familiar with. I am going to recommend, though, that when you do this, every decision that you make with AI, you try to be as conscious as you can about what you are giving up. And in this case, if you allow deep research or any kind of agent to do the work on your behalf, you have to recognize that you are giving up control. That's just inherent in this process. When you use a system like this, you are giving up control. You're giving up control of how you're going to learn this information. You're giving up a little bit of control over what you're going to learn. It's really important that you retain control as soon as possible, meaning that once I'm satisfied with what the agent has given me, now I can go pull stuff out, extract all the knowledge, extract all the links, extract all the PDFs that I'm interested in, and then do the thinking for myself. You want to get to that point as quickly as you can. But the other thing that I just want to mention is that it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to give up some control. Okay, so this is going to sound a little bit strange, but when you give up control, it's my opinion that that's okay as long as you understand what you're giving up and what you're getting in return. Don't just give up control for the sake of it, to use a tool and to have this be easy. But what you do often need when you're learning a new skill or jumping into a new field, a new expertise, is a little bit of guidance. And regardless of whether or not you're interacting with a robot or a human being, when you ask somebody to help you with a skill, if I ask someone to teach me how to go surfing, right? I don't know how to surf. I don't have that skill set. I don't have the knowledge. But someone else who does is going to teach me the way that they think I should learn. That is just a human-to-human example of me giving up some control over my surfing to get a little bit of help from somebody else. And I think that that is a really good analogy of what you're using here, because obviously this system can be very helpful in guiding me in the right direction, but I think it's just a little bit too tempting to just leave it there. And I'm going to challenge you, right? Never leave it there. Every single time you have AI do something for you, that is 100% the starting point. Because I don't think there's going to come a point where you can actually trust a machine with your thinking. I don't think we're ever going to get to that point, and I don't think we ever want to get to that point. But remember, we do not want to fall asleep at the wheel. So as soon as you can, you want to get to outlining your own thoughts. You want to get to turning those outlines into your own writing as soon as possible. And that keeps you in charge and keeps you responsible for your own work. All right, I'll see you in the next video.